Imagine your boss calls you into the office tomorrow morning, tells you that you are fired.
Huh.
And,
Or man, yeah, the nightmare scenario.
right. And then you check your phone only to realize your bank account has been completely drained. I mean, who are you on the walk home? Are you still you?
That is, it's the ultimate psychological stress test.
It really is.
Uh-huh.
Today, we are cracking open a document that forces you to answer that exact terrifying question.
Because, most of us build our entire sense of self on a foundation of things that can just be taken away in an instant.
Exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're joining us. Our mission today is to explore a really fascinating, highly structured workbook on personal identity.
Yeah, and we sourced this from vitae.com, right?
We did, yeah. We're going to unpack how this document guides its reader, meaning you or, anyone who sits down with it, through this rigorous, almost surgical process of self-discovery.
It moves from basic psychological assessments all the way down to deeply held spiritual beliefs.
And it does not waste any time getting there.
No, it really doesn't. It's a very deliberate unpeeling of the layers we all build up around ourselves just to survive in the modern world.
Definitely. But before we even get to the first prompt, we have to talk about the visual hook right at the top of the source material.
The silhouette.
Right. It's this striking minimalist image.
Yeah.
You have a gray silhouette of a human head, and right in the center of the mind is a giant question mark.
Just leaning there.
Exactly. And this head is resting just above the word identity. It perfectly sets the tone for an intense interrogation of the self.
Visually, it tells the reader that they are a mystery, even to themselves.
Yeah.
The gray silhouette represents a blank slate. Like, you might think you have yourself all figured out, but that question mark demands that you prove it.
Now, just a quick note on objectivity before we wade into the deep end here. Because this document approaches identity from a specifically Christian framework, our goal today is not to endorse a specific theology.
Right, or tell you what to believe.
Exactly. Rather, we want to impartially explore the thought-provoking framework the authors use to guide a reader toward discovering who they are.
Because regardless of your personal worldview, the architecture of this workbook, how it forces you to confront your attachments, is universally fascinating.
It really is.
We're looking at the mechanics of self-examination here. The engine under the hood is this masterful sequence of cognitive dissonance and resolution.
The way it engineers self-reflection is incredibly potent.
Yeah, regardless of your background.
So let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Before the document allows the reader to explore their broader place in the world, it forces them to confront their raw, stripped-down self.
It really strips you down.
It does. The guide kicks off by asking the reader to describe themselves in just 3 words, adjectives or nouns. Just 3.
Which creates immediate cognitive friction.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about the psychology of self-categorization. We're biologically wired to use narrative to explain our existence.
Right, like we give people our resume, our life story.
The context for why we made certain mistakes. Exactly. Boiling your entire existence down to 3 words instantly strips away your ability to hide behind a story.
It forces you to prioritize your core traits.
Yeah, and usually people freeze up because they realize their traits contradict each other.
And it gets heavier. The workbook hits you with these massive prompts. It asks you to name your greatest strength or success, your greatest weakness or failure, and your greatest fear.
It feels like a brutal job interview.
It does. A job interview where you are the one interrogating yourself, but then it introduces a terrifying hypothetical.
Well, this part is wild.
Right.
Right.
It asks, how would you feel if your greatest strength was removed? And how would you feel if your greatest weakness was revealed?
That requires serious psychological heavy lifting.
Definitely.
It forces the reader to look at the load-bearing pillars of their ego.
Yeah, let's use a structural metaphor here. We use our careers or our talents like load-bearing pillars for our psychological house. So if your entire identity rests on the pillar of being the smartest person in the room, and suddenly you experience cognitive decline, the roof doesn't just sag.
Your entire house collapses.
Exactly. The workbook is essentially asking the reader to walk through their own house and knock out the biggest pillars to see if anything is left standing. Like asking Superman who he is without his powers.
Wow, yeah. If your greatest strength is your work ethic and you become physically disabled, who are you?
Scary thought.
By asking how you'd feel if that strength was removed, the document exposes the fragility of building an identity on temporary attributes. It reveals that what we call our identity is often just a survival strategy.
And then there's the flip side. It asks how you would feel if your greatest weakness or failure was revealed to the world.
That taps directly into universal imposter syndrome.
Oh, 100%.
It demands that you look at the shame secretly dictating your daily choices. Like, are you working hard because you love the work, or are you working hard to outrun the fear of being exposed as a fraud?
Speaking of work, the document takes a massive pivot here that I actually want to push back on a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
It moves from internal attributes directly to external wealth. I mean, it literally asks for your approximate net worth.
Yeah.
Assets minus liabilities.
Yeah, they bring out the calculator.
Math. In a workbook about the soul, isn't it a bit cynical to assume everyone is tying their identity to their bank account? Most people are just working to pay the mortgage and survive.
Well, it might seem cynical, but it's actually a highly calculated trap.
A trap.
Yeah. It acknowledges that for some, identity is tied up with possessions, but then it springs the real mechanism. It asks, is this amount enough for you, your family, and your retirement?
And if you answer yes.
It hits you with a profound challenge. It says, if yes, then why are you still working?
Oh, man.
And if you answer no, it asks, how much is enough?
Why are you still working? That is a gut punch.
It really is. It disrupts the modern default settings for who we think we are. If you've hit your financial goal, if you have enough, and you still can't stop working, it proves that the job is no longer about survival.
Right. The job is serving as a proxy for your identity.
Exactly. You're afraid to retire not because you'll starve, but because the psychological vacuum of having nowhere to go on a Monday morning would destroy you.
You realize you're just running because you're terrified to step off the treadmill and stand in the silence.
Yeah.
So once the document has successfully demolished your reliance on your net worth, your internal fears, and your external strengths, it leaves a deliberate vacuum.
And to rebuild, it shifts the focus outward.
Right. It moves from what do I have to where do I fit?
It introduces the social architecture of our lives, the roles we play.
Yeah. The workbook gives the reader a specific list of roles and asks them to rank them in order of predominance in their mind, from most to least.
And the list includes things like son, father, husband, your strengths, your vocation, your resource.
Also child of God, servant of God, citizen of heaven, church member, and church leader or ministry leader. It's this whole mix of earthly relationships, personal attributes, and spiritual titles.
And the text explicitly points out a key observation to the reader here. Most of the items on this list are relationships with things and people outside of ourselves.
Which is very telling.
It is. We constantly define ourselves by our utility to the external world. You know, I'm an employee to my boss. I'm a provider to my family.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. After you rank this hierarchy of hats you wear, the document asks you to classify each item as either temporal or permanent.
Temporal meaning temporary, earthly, passing away.
Right, and permanent meaning eternal, lasting. So what does this all mean for how the reader is supposed to prioritize their daily life?
What's fascinating here is the sheer cognitive dissonance this specific exercise creates.
How so?
Well, let's say you ranked your vocation as the #1 most predominant thing in your mind. You spend all your waking hours stressing over emails and deadlines.
Guilt is charged.
Right. But in the next column, you're forced to label your vocation as temporal.
Oh, wow.
It will end. You'll retire, or the company will close, or you'll pass away. By forcing a ranking between the temporal and the permanent, it makes the reader face a devastating question. Does my daily mental energy actually align with what lasts?
That's intense. But I have to ask, doesn't classifying your job or even your role as a parent as temporal breed a kind of nihilism?
That's a fair question.
I mean, if you realize none of these daily stressors are permanent, why care about them at all? Why pay the bills or show up to the soccer game?
That is the exact philosophical danger the workbook is navigating. If you strip away the temporal without providing a permanent anchor, you get nihilism.
Right.
The goal isn't to make you stop caring about your family or your job. The goal is an audit of your mental real estate. It's asking why the temporal things are causing you permanent level anxiety.
That makes a lot of sense. It highlights the hypocrisy of our own attention spans.
Exactly.
We might claim that our core permanent values are the most important, but our actual daily bandwidth is entirely consumed by temporary fires.
And the document doesn't let you just sit there feeling guilty about the imbalance. It moves directly into the mechanics of behavioral change.
Yeah, it asks, which relationship would you want to be the most predominant in your mind?
And then it requires you to create a T-chart. On one side, things you'll start doing to achieve that. On the other side, things you'll stop doing.
It's essentially cognitive behavioral therapy, disguised as a workbook assignment.
Pretty much.
It's demanding implementation intentions. You can't just have a vague desire to be better. You have to identify the specific behavioral friction, like, I will stop checking my phone at the dinner table. I will start waking up 10 minutes earlier to meditate.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture of psychology, identifying a core belief is useless if you don't recognize the incongruent behaviors attached to it.
Absolutely.
Setting actionable steps to align your daily habits with your desired permanent identity is really the only way to solidify the change.
Which brings us to a major pivot in the material. The tension established in the previous section between permanent and temporal roles creates a desperate need for a foundation.
A firm place to stand.
Right. The workbook anticipates the dread of realizing your daily hats are temporary, and it immediately introduces its core spiritual thesis to anchor the reader.
And the visual tone completely shifts here.
It does. Gone is the gray silhouette with the question mark. Instead, you get an image with bright, colorful pastel block letters declaring, I am a child of God.
It moves from aggressive deconstruction to a bold, definitive declaration. The psychological teardown is over. The rebuilding phase has begun.
The reader is directed to ponder a specific biblical passage, Ephesians 2:1-10, which discusses being made alive and being God's handiwork. But crucially, the text gives a very stern warning.
A very specific instruction, yeah.
It says, what are your thoughts and feelings? Do not give expected or spiritually correct answers, but your honest thoughts and feelings.
That instruction is vital for bypassing the brain's autopilot.
Because we all have an autopilot.
Oh, absolutely. In any highly structured community, whether it's a corporate office or a religious group, there's a shared vocabulary that people learn to use to signal that they belong. The spiritually correct answer.
Right, check in the box.
The authors know that readers might just parrot back Sunday school answers without actually believing them. They are demanding vulnerability because conformity is the enemy of genuine identity.
To enforce that vulnerability, the next exercise relies on a fascinating mechanism. It's like a high-stakes existential game of Mad Libs.
I love this part.
You literally have to fill in the blanks of a sentence. It goes, I am a child of the blank God. And it specifies you need a noun or adjective there, who blank, and it specifies you need a verb followed by a past, present, or future work of God.
Why do you think it forces the reader to build the sentence rather than just read a pre-written statement?
Because active articulation fires completely different synapses than passive reading. You can't just skim it.
No, you can't.
You have to mine your own history and physically write, I am a child of the forgiving God who rescued me from my own anxiety. It forces you to synthesize the abstract theology with your specific, messy reality.
In cognitive psychology, this is known as the generation effect.
The generation effect.
Yeah. Information is better remembered if it's generated from your own mind rather than simply read. The document follows up this generation exercise by asking how the specific identity actually affects the way the reader thinks and lives.
Testing the application.
Exactly. If you truly believe this permanent identity, how does it change your Tuesday morning commute? How does it change the way you respond to an aggressive email from a coworker?
Because if it doesn't change the plumbing of your daily life, it's just a slogan on a bumper sticker. It's meaningless.
The workbook takes it a step further to ensure the reader grasps the concept deeply. It challenges the reader to describe what it means to be a child of God to a non-believer.
And furthermore, it asks them to list scriptural references to help a new believer understand it.
That is the ultimate stress test for comprehension.
It really is.
It's the Feynman technique in action. The physicist Richard Feynman famously posited that if you cannot explain a concept in simple terms to a layperson, you don't actually understand it yourself.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
If you can only explain your core identity using insider jargon and complex theological terms, you're hiding behind the vocabulary. By forcing the reader to translate their permanent identity for a non-believer, the document tests whether the concept has actually taken root.
It grounds the ethereal concepts into plain conversational reality. You have to be able to explain the architecture of your soul to the guy sitting next to you on the bus.
Exactly.
But understanding one's identity in a vacuum isn't the final goal of this text. The final section of the source material insists on externalizing these internal revelations. It's entirely focused on accountability and action.
Because an internal shift without external friction rarely survives contact with the real world.
Very true. The section requires actionable next steps. For example, the reader must complete an online form regarding a new image at vitae.com and reflect on the results.
Right.
They're also assigned to read an article from desiringgod.org, called What God Thinks About You. But again, the instructions manipulate how the reader engages with the text.
Yes, they don't just say, read this.
Right. They say to read it with a focus on what God has done for you, and to physically highlight all the appropriate phrases and clauses.
It demands that you hunt for the evidence. It refuses to let the reader slip back into the passive consumption of information.
Highlighting forces you to pay attention.
Exactly. When you're reading to find specific clauses to highlight, you're engaging in active filtering, which cements the information into long-term memory.
Now, the final assignment is the one that really pivots the entire experience. It says, before our next session, meet with another Iron Brother to share your answers to the above questions with the goal of sharpening one another.
And it references Proverbs 27.17, right?
Yeah, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. But let me push back here for a second. We've spent this whole time doing incredibly deep, solitary internal reflection. We've stripped away our defenses. Introducing another person now feels, I don't know, risky. Couldn't this easily turn into a shame spiral or forced conformity rather than healthy accountability?
That is a very real risk, and it depends entirely on the dynamic with the person you choose. But the authors are arguing that the risk of isolation is far greater.
Interesting.
The distinction between a shame spiral and healthy accountability comes down to the concept of sharpening.
How so?
Well, sharpening is not about a superior piece of metal beating a weaker piece of metal into submission. Iron sharpens iron. It implies a peer-to-peer relationship.
Oh, I see.
It involves friction, sparks, and grinding away dull edges. If you keep your stripped-down identity and your action plans a secret, the friction required to break your promises to yourself is zero.
Think back to the T-chart from earlier. If I write down that I'm going to stop checking my phone at dinner, but I never tell anyone, the moment my phone buzzes, I'm going to check it.
Right.
I'll just justify it internally.
Bringing in an iron brother grounds the abstract self-reflection in real-world consequences. It monitors your commitment. It moves the identity from the theoretical realm into the communal realm.
You can't just hide anymore.
Exactly. You might have figured out who you are in isolation, but you need the friction of another human being to help you stay true to it when the temporal world tries to pull you back into your old habits.
You need the friction to keep the blade sharp.
Mm-hmm.
So let's pull all of this together. We've gone on quite a conceptual journey through this source material.
We really have.
We started with the brutal demolition of our ego, stripping away our net worth, our internal fears, and knocking out the load-bearing pillars of our strengths.
Which created the vacuum necessary to audit the social architecture of our lives.
Right. We then sorted the hierarchy of hats we wear, confronting the terrifying reality that most of our mental energy is spent on temporary roles.
And to prevent a slide into nihilism, the workbook anchored us to a permanent spiritual identity,
forcing us to translate complex theology into our own active vernacular. And finally, it culminated in communal accountability, bringing in a peer to ensure the internal work results in external friction.
It systematically dismantles the false idols of career and wealth and rebuilds an identity meant to withstand the inevitable changes of life.
Which brings us to you, our listener. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn the lens on you. How often do you step back and audit the various hats you wear on a daily basis?
That's the real test.
Have you ever actually sat down and tested them against your own core values? Are the things taking up the most room in your mind actually the things you care about the most?
This raises an important question, and I would leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
Look back at the last 24 hours of your life. If you had to classify the single thing you spent the most time worrying about today as either temporal or permanent, which would it be?
Oof.
And if that worry is entirely temporal, like if it's tied to an email, a bank balance, or an argument that won't matter in a year, let alone eternity, how does that realization change your to-do list for tomorrow?
That takes us right back to that gray silhouette, the giant question mark inside the mind. The point of digging into our own psychology isn't necessarily to get a clean binary picture of who we are.
No, not at all.
Maybe the point is simply the bravery required to keep asking the hard questions, to keep sorting the temporary from the permanent, and to invite someone else into the messy process of rebuilding the house. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.